Hey, it's Joe West from the West Barn with
Mike Shimshack.
Today we've got Mike Fraser on, producer, engineer, mixer. He's gone from janitor to award-winning producer and engineer. He's worked on, get a load of this, 7 AC/DC records, including The Razor's Edge, Ball Breaker, Stiff Upper Lip, Black Ice, Rock or Bust, Power Up. He recorded and mixed the legendary song Thunderstruck. He's also worked with bands like Aerosmith, Metallica, Chickenfoot, Elvis Costello, Bad Company, Motley Crue, The Cult, Guns N' Roses, Van Halen, Norah Jones, Rush, Bryan Adams, Led Zeppelin, and Joe Satriani. Welcome to the show, Mike Fraser.
Hi, guys.
Hey.
Thanks for having me.
You're coming to us all the way from, looks like sunny British Columbia today, right?
Sunny, we don't know what that glowing orb in the sky is. We don't usually see it, but we're enjoying it, yes.
Well, welcome to the show, man. It's such a pleasure to have you. I'd like to thank Sean McDonald, who's an engineer and producer out of Pittsburgh, a great producer and friend, who said that he saw an interview that you did doing a deep dive, I guess, on Pump.
Oh, okay.
And he said, you got to get this guy on. And I said, can you introduce? He says, I don't know him. I just loved the interview. So he had said he had reached out and you were friendly on Facebook. And so I did the same. And what do you know? We're here on the interweb talking to you. That's a sign of a really legit dude.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Yeah.
I also said to Mike, I said, we know one thing. The guy's not a dick. He's done 7 records with AC/DC. I don't think you could be an asshole and be on 7 records with any band, let alone AC/DC. So we know you're a good guy as well.
Oh, cheers.
What an interesting thing. It's like some people struggle so hard to just get on one record. And here it is. You've been on 7 AC/DC records. You've been on multiple Aerosmith records. It's like, that's the true test of a legit, like a guy who knows how to find his place in the room, a confident guy that can get things done. So that's underrated in our business, right? It's like everybody's got their eye on the prize. And the reality is the real prize is staying in the room with people. And you've been able to do that just so many times with different people, Aerosmith all the way to Norah Jones and Elvis Costello. So that's a pretty wide discography of music.
Yeah. Well, I found that for me, the most important thing I've learned and you need to learn is psychology. All the sound, getting the sounds, all working the gear, you can learn and do that. But, if you haven't learned how to handle people, then it makes it, it's stressful enough in the control room trying to create something and the red light's on, you're recording and all that, and everybody's stress level is pretty high. You got to kind of keep it chill, keep it fun, because when people are having fun, they're relaxed. When they're relaxed, they're doing their
yeah, I heard an interview with you where you were talking about doing vocals, liking to do them in the control room, because it's like, they may see you laughing after a serious take. And the reality is you were like all falling out because how good the take was, but they're in this room and they don't know the context. And it's like, bring them into the conversation, bring them into the room, so everybody's on the same page. Sometimes the person that you got to manage the most is yourself. Like, do you find that you're finding out, okay, in this room, I need to pull back and be more of, I need to disappear rather than step up and fix a problem, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And, in the control room, the less that's said sometimes is more, you can kind of overstate things or whatever, just let the artist be the artist, keep them comfortable, keep them happy. If they're not liking their headphone mix or whatever, they're not going to perform. So, you're always trying to do something to keep the artist happy,
Dude, I can't tell you the times that I've interrupted a performance that was like really right there. And like told them, hey, and I give a reference or I did something. And then the next take was like the antithesis. And I was just like, I wish I just shut up. And because they were like millimeters from it. And I literally have thrown them off in the left field.
Yeah. Well, like, if you're working with a singer and you do a pass and it's not that great, you don't always have to tell them that because they know that. Yeah. You just say, okay, great, cool. We've got some good stuff there. Let's try another one. Or,
how about this? How about this? It's like, hey, you know what I loved about that?
Yeah, exactly.
I loved what you were doing. I know where you're going with that, but it's like, watch out for this and this. But I love, like I find like if someone sends me a song to listen to as a songwriter or a mix to listen to, because plenty of people say, hey, how would you listen to a mix of mine? And then you say like, I always try to find 3 things that I love about their mix: the blend, the energy, the vibe. And then I say, hey, watch out. The phase is weird here. Watch out about, I don't know what's going on here with this. but it's like, give them that moment. Cause I remember being a mix engineer and getting notes back. And if the first 4 were bad, my heart sunk down into my chest as a mix engineer. Right. I just got I turned 8 years old again, and I was like in elementary school, like a whipped puppy. And it was just, from there, it was anxiety.
Yeah. Well, I get the same thing too, though. Even if I get mixed notes and they say, "Oh, that sounded great," but, and as soon as I read "but," I go, "Oh."
Dude, here's what I'd love to maybe do a little bit of a deeper dive on. You tell me if you're willing. I have to assume after 8 records with AC/DC or 7 records in Thunderstruck, that there were some things that continued on. Like you started to do things the same, right? You've started to find like, this is the way we do the drums for ACD. So this is the AC/DC. This is the way we mic up the guitar cabs. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about, move through the band and see like what you were usually doing on those records, what you found like, hey, this is what I was using. We always recorded through X, Y, or Z console, or it was this microphone. So are you willing to maybe take a little trip with us and talk about some of that stuff?
Yeah, I'll help where I can.
Are those records all done at different studios, different tracking rooms?
See, when we did Razor's Edge, so that was the first one. They had the record pretty much done with the brother George, and George, there's a family thing he had to be involved with, whether it was an illness or something. Anyways, he couldn't finish the record, so they called up Bruce Fairburn, who's a big producer here in Vancouver. And all we needed to do is basically was vocals and guitar solos. So they came and we started doing a vocal with Bryan and quickly discovered it was the wrong key for him. So to change the key of the song, we had to re-record the instruments, just left the drums. And so we redid the guitars and bass. And I guess Angus and Mal liked the sound of those so much better than what they had. We ended up re-recording all the guitars and bass for the song. So they just really liked the sound that I was capturing. It was more their sound, I guess. And, like I was a huge AC/DC fan, so I just wanted them to sound like them. So that's basically all I did. So I think that was the main reason why I've been on each record since with them, with I think 4 different producers. Because, I know what their sound is. I don't force them to say, no, let's try it this way. Hey, let's try getting, put some delay on your guitar or whatever. Like I just get their sound and I make them comfortable. Like AC/DC are really tight knit, close family. The whole band, it's like a family. And I guess I fit into that family. There's no personality rubs or anything. So they're super comfortable. I'm doing my job. So they like. In
general, would you say that it was mostly, were they MCI consoles? Were they vintage 80 series Neves? What was your main tracking your main tracking date? What were mostly the kinds of consoles you were using?
On Razor's Edge, it was all on an SSL, recorded and mixed. And then
an E with G kind of console.
No, it was a G. Yeah, I think it's maybe at Little Mountain though. Maybe that was the E. That was before the G's came out. Anyways, and then after that, we've done most of them at Little Mountain or at the warehouse, and that's all on a Need. And that's
80 series.
Yeah, it's that big Diane. It's from Air Studios.
Okay,
I think it came from Montserrat or something. So I think
so it would be like an 80 whatever.
Yeah.
In the SSL, when you recorded that one, did you use the pre's in the desk or were they all external pre's? You remember?
I used the pre's. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But the thing is with Vancouver, because we're such a young city in terms of recording gear, like, New York, Nashville, LA, grew up earlier, so they had all that great old recording gear, and we didn't have any of that stuff, so we don't really have any outboard EQ. Now we do have it. The Mountain disappeared. We had these old Neve Spitfires with the 1081s. Well, they took those apart and parted them out and put them in. So we've got a bunch of those as preamps now. So if I'm on the SSL, sometimes I'll throw some drums or
we're surprised because we hear it all the time from like legendary dudes that do these records, like Stairway to Heaven or the Back in Black record. Or we talk to these guys that are on these records that is young. I guess we're not young anymore, right? Look at us. No one's going to accuse us of being young. But
we're still young here.
As young mental engineers, we were like, oh, well, the mic pre-selection. And all these old timers are all like, I don't know, whatever was in the console.
Use whatever they had, man.
right? And it's like I'm continuing taking it back. It's like it makes me think like, how much can it matter now if it didn't matter back then? And some of those sounds were just stunning. And how much are we wasting our time mulling over the myriad of decisions possibilities rather than focusing on making Thunderstruck, right? Or making Aerosmith Pump. How much time are we wasting not on the prize, which is making a great record? So
yeah, exactly.
Interesting note. So I love that you use the SSL pre's. And the SSL pre's, I don't remember them being really horrible. We never used them. Was the point, it's like we hardly ever use them. But you put anything through anything. We just talked to Frank Filippetti about recording James Taylor's Hourglass, the Grammy Award winning record for Best Engineered Album, on an O2R with the internal mic pre's. And it really is like, okay, let's get rid of all the questions and let's just work on what's important in the room. And what's important is, like you said, making the artist comfortable and making a great record. Let's talk about drum kit. In general, we're going to talk about like an amalgamation of all these records. In general, when you were recording the drums, what were you using on the kick drum? Was it one mic, multiple mics?
Well, the kick drum, I typically use like a D12 and a 421 together, and I'll just sort of find their phase, the right phase where I want it inside the drum or slightly outside. I never mic the kick, the pedal side. I know a lot of guys mic that to get the attack or whatever. I never mic that because I don't know, the phase between the front and the back, and then the leakage of the snare, everything gets weird for me.
So you would have maybe D12 maybe out on the outer rim and the 421 more in towards the beater kind of deal?
Sometimes it sounds better when the D12's in and the 421's out. I don't know what the logistics of that is, but I just play around with it till it sounds right to me.
And usually
you don't have to jump on the EQ too fast. That's my thing.
You don't want to jump on the EQ too fast,
move
right?
Move the mics around till you get it is what you mostly want, and then if you need to tidy it up with EQ, then go for it.
And would they have a front head on that drum or a port you could get in, or were you usually dealing with no head on the drum?
A port mostly to get in, because without a front head on, you're not really getting that low subby tone to it,
But in general, you would say probably in general, the D12 was usually the outer mic on the rim looking, and the 420 was probably a little closer, right?
Probably.
In general?
Probably.
Okay. And on snare drum, was it just an SM57 or was there anything?
Yeah, everything else is 57s for the toms and the snare top and bottom, 57s. I've tried various other mics, 414 works pretty good on the snare sometimes, but I find your hat bleed seems to get way worse on any other mic, or it's too narrow and you're not getting the right. The 57 just seems to get in enough of the outside sound, but you're still getting a focus sound. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it is my thing.
And some of this goes to every record that we hear, probably in the 90 percentile or SM57s on snares. And you can't ignore the fact that as a species, we've been listening to records that 90% of them are 57s. There's an expectation to the listener. And every once in a while, you'll see someone that said, hey, I put a KM84 on it, or I put a 451, or I put an MKH40 on it, or I did, and you'll say, well, that really sounds great. But there is something to that, like, hey, 90% of the humans making records have done this. So when we listen, we kind of we have a preconceived notion of a 57. And you were just standard, between the hat and first rack tom, nothing, no voodoo there. Did you have your 50? Of course, you had your bottom snare out of phase, but did you ever use one of those cables that puts them into one mic pre? You ever try that?
No, I don't, because I like controlling the bottom head separately. Like maybe even EQ it separately. Sometimes I'll just whack some lower mids on it to get more of the thump.
That's a great point. I never thought of that.
Weird because everybody usually takes all that shit out and just has the top, because you want the rattles of the snares on there, right? Well, I sometimes do the opposite, just whack, because that head's kind of boinging more, whereas the top head is, especially when the drummer hits it really hard, and then instead of lifting the stick up, like that's what Phil does, is he hits it really hard, but he keeps his stick on it, so it shuts the drum down, and it's so hard to get a good open snare drum sound on him. So I find if I get that bottom head kind of ringing a bit more, that helps a lot.
That's great too. And that's like an engineer's solution to a player's issue, that you might have an issue. You're not going to tell Phil Rudd what to do,
No,
right?
and
You're
you
going to
don't
just like
want
try to
to.
get what you need out of the tone of the drum
Yeah.
by working a little harder.
That's kind of my point. Like, any musician, you can't make them change how they're playing. You got to solve that problem.
That's a great point. And that's another reason why you're on 7 records. It's like you're not messing with, they're not like secretly like, this dude's trying to tell me what to do. I've been playing drums my whole life. He doesn't want you, he wants you to capture him. And they're a great band. This isn't a band that you found playing a local bar that you're trying to level up. This is AC/DC, I mean, large part of that is just like, how do I make them sound like they sound? I don't want to mess it up. And I also love the 57s on the toms. You would never think it, but it's an $85 microphone, street value. You go out there on Craigslist or wherever your marketplace, you can get them for $85 all day long.
Yeah.
And here they are on some of your favorite records. And while you're thinking, I need those Josephsons, those $2,000 mics, which sound great. Yeah. Here it is. Here's a poor man's version that is on arguably some of the best rock records ever made. And you never think that, so a bunch of 57s. And hi-hat.
Well, I like the Cam84. I don't know what it is about that. A lot of studios, I just tend to use what's there in the studio. And sometimes they just got a whole bunch of 452s or something like that. So throw those on the close overheads and the hi-hat just to match it all up. But if they've got like a Cam84 or something similar condensory, I like that on the hi-hat. It seems to have you got to tweak the top end on them a little bit more. They're not as sparkly, but they just got a nice sound to them and not so, so high-endy.
There's a real beauty in the hi-hat that's in that mid-range that as you become an older engineer, you find it. It's like sometimes the best percussion mic is a 57 too, because it takes that high end off and you've got like this real nice upper mid-range, where it's not just all 10K action. And when you're looking at that hi-hat, let's say a hi-hat is, we're looking at a dish here. I got my hands out sort of left to right. Or is that mic sort of at the 3? If the drummer is away from me, is that mic sort of coming in and looking at an angle straight down? How close to the hi-hat are you getting?
It depends on what you're after and how he's playing it. And sometimes even where it's positioned, because sometimes they'll have a cymbal right there. So it's really, but I like to kind of look on the, like that, if the hat's like that, I kind of like to look on the edge so that when you get that movement, that you get that. If you get too much towards the bell, okay, that's great. But sometimes you're missing some of that subtlety of
all the upbeat stuff. So he's
hat.
pointing like towards the outside of a flying saucer where the two lips would meet.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And how far away? Just about 4 or 5 inches.
Oh, like that.
Yeah, about the length from your finger, your thumb to your pinky.
10 inches. No.
That's the way I see it. Hey, when you're and you're saying you're using close miking for the other overheads, do you have far miking for the overheads,
yes,
like higher up?
Yeah. I'll close mic just off kind of the bell, in between the bell and the edge of the cymbal. I don't mic every cymbal, but I like to have a mic at least if one mic's pointing at 2 and then another mic will point at the other 2, or if he's got a whole array, sometimes I'll throw up maybe 3 sort of close mics. And again, they're about two hands apart. And then I throw up a pair of 87s right above the whole drum kit. And they would be up, depending, but 8 feet maybe.
Wow, so up
and
there.
The combination of those two, you get the nice, but you get the nice decay because there's so many rock drums that I hear, unless they've got a big room on it, you just hear this, and the cymbals don't decay. It's like he's grabbed the cymbals, and I like them to sound real, so I use that combination. And
so
then,
the upper ones have more ring to them than the closer ones.
Yeah. They'll have the whole kit in there too, so that can kind of help. Sometimes it's a bit of a hindrance depending on the room, because sometimes you don't want that sort of honky room sound in there, and I don't like to carve too much of that out because then you just get these little wispy things. Like I like to keep everything in there, especially when I'm recording. I can deal with it later when I'm mixing,
That's an awesome point. I'm a fan of that too. Large diaphragm condenser mics as overheads, and then don't take all the EQ out of them. Don't swap out everything under it's like, this is a great drum sound. It was good enough for Led Zeppelin. It's like, listen to it. You might like it.
Yeah. Exactly.
And do you find, and you're doing those just as a space pair, XY? What are you normally doing for your upper overheads?
You know, I wish I could say I did something mathematical, but I just throw them up there really. Like, as long as, you know, I've kind of got them up like that and then tilted.
Okay.
So if you're looking a little bit left and right.
So center focused and sort of pointing out at 45-degree angles towards the sides of the kit.
And then again, play around with them a bit until, you know, you get your phase sorted out. And, you know, sometimes if the snare's a little bit more on the left side, you got to watch that. You want your cymbals right, but then you don't want your snare to be, you know, pulling you off to one side. Play with those, around with those a bit too.
And when you've got, do you have any other mics in that close drum kit area that are standards?
Sometimes I'll throw a mic down by the kick drum, underneath the snare, and down by his kick pedal, really. 414. I'll put it in Omni, and then you just flick it around like this. So you're getting the bottom of the snare and the front of the kick, and that'll always be out of phase. So sometimes, you know, if you flip the phase, you get this really cool thing on the snare. The kick sort of changes. If you flip it the other way, you get this really cool thing in the kick, and you sort of start losing your snare. So you play around with that a little bit. Separate, so that when I'm mixing, I can change it, do this. No, I'm not using it on that song. So that's the only other kind of close one I'll throw in there. I also double mic the toms. So what I do a lot of times now is I put 421s on the top because they've got more crack to them. So you're getting the crack, and then I'll put a 57 in the middle of the bottom head.
The reso head.
That's where you going. But they got to really tune the toms good, because, you know, if the top and bottom head aren't quite in tune, that bottom mic really picks that up, and it, you know, it's you know.
Right.
So,
and then you've got to flip the phase, of course, on the bottom mic.
Yeah. That one I have an XY box made, because we used to do the Y chords and they'd always get lost. And then, can the tech guy make us up a couple? That takes another half hour, 40 minutes. And, you know, so I had to make me a box. So I got 2 in and 1 out. And the bottom row was all flipped out of phase. So I just plug each chord and cool. We're done. Yeah.
Awesome. Room mics. Tell us your secrets.
A lot of time, whatever's, you know, at the end of once you've got everything mic'd, it's usually whatever's left over. But, you know, generally 87s, MD, what are they? MD 49s, I think they are.
409s, the Sennheisers?
No, the 49s.
The M49s?
M49s. Large diaphragm. Yeah.
And then a lot of times, because there's always lots left over, 57s.
Yeah.
Love them. I love them. For rock music, I'll use them on everything. You know,
and I know
use on vocals.
Yeah.
57, 58.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And in general, you know, it depends on the room, but how far are these room mics living away from the drum kit in your world? Mostly?
Again, it depends on the room. If I stick up 57, because what I've noticed is a lot of times we'll throw up 57s, all the bands sitting around, 2 guitar players, bass, and we'll throw up 57s as just talkback mics. They're just baloney mics. We'll bust them all together to one track, compress the heck out of them so that, you know, if somebody's playing, they're trying to talk, it's not killing it, headphones and stuff. And then I've noticed, you know, when they start playing, oh shoot, I got the talkback still on. Wow, that sounds awesome. So I kind of started doing room mics like that.
Yeah,
so
that's cool.
57s and compress the crap out of them, and it's like, it's awesome. So they'd be, I don't know, 20 feet away, like, you know, back, but not thing. And then, you know, a lot of times you'll throw up mics up in the back corner of the room and all that. And again, depending on the size of the room, they work, and sometimes they don't. There's usually a delay to them, and, you know, you can shift them later in the mix. But I don't know, I've just sort of gotten away from a lot of that. I like small rooms and then compressing it because the room sounds better. It's like a Zeppelin kind of thing. You know, the trick at Little Mountain is we had a loading bay, but it was separate from the tracking room. So we'd open up these doors, and with gobos and stuff, we'd sort of build a little tunnel, and it would funnel the sound out to the loading bay. So on the snare and a little bit in the kick and toms, you'd have this huge room sound, but no cymbals, which is great because cymbals in a room are just so hard to control. And if you put any compression on it, it just ends up all these cymbals and stuff. So that was the trick at Little Mountain. You could get this huge drum sound. So basically you could have this tight room drum sound and 2 faders, move them up, and there's the room. So it was total control. It was great.
Wow. When you're making like a record like that, I mean, that seems like a lot of microphones to manage.
Yeah, man.
How many tracks? I mean, you're an audio engineer. I mean, I guess it's part of the job, right? But the little bit, like I get a little anxious when I hear about like top and bottom of toms, and you're getting, you're routing all this stuff and headphone and all the talkback mics being routed. How many tracks do these live on in a general sense? You're talking about 15, 16 tracks of drums, right?
About there now, yeah. When I first started as an assistant, anyways, all we had there was 16-track analog machines, and then they had the first 24-track as I started engineering stuff. So track management was always huge. So I remember we used to do kick, snare, stereo drums, and then sometimes, a lot of times, you put your hi-hat separate because that one you always wanted to play with, but that was it because you didn't have to have room for everything else. And if you did spread your drums out, later on you had to bounce them down to stereo tracks to create some more tracks anyways. So that's how we started. So you start getting your blends. Now, as we had got into the 24 track and the later 48 tracks, it'd be nice to separate the toms out because sometimes, that one's a little softer. I want to boost that, but when I boost it, the cymbals are coming up. So then we started separating the toms out. So now I basically do, kick, snare, top, bottom. I'll put toms on separate tracks now that we're on Pro Tools and we got the tracks because, if there's a problem with one of them, you can fix it easier. Stereo overheads, and I'll do the 2 pairs in together, like the close ones and the closer ones together. And then the room tracks. And sometimes I'll do multiple room tracks. Like I'll have maybe one right in front of the drum kit that I just compress, a mono one, and just stuff you could play around with later. So yeah, it's probably about 15 tracks, somewhere out there.
Well, I get it too, because you're consolidating the toms down to one track, or the top and bottom mic for each tom on its own track, and overheads. So you're still making some decisions there and not driving yourself too crazy. And when you bass is just normally a DI and a mic? What's your bass like?
Yeah, DI and amp. Yeah.
What are you looking for? It's like there's 2 worlds of like, I use the low end from the amp. Oh no, I use the low end from the DI. What's your general outcome?
It changes. I think generally I like the low end off the DI because it's cleaner and punchier, and it adds into the amp nicely. I find a lot of amps, they just get woofy as they get going, like it's just too, or if it's really super low and really pushing the cat, then you just get the speaker buzz or the cabinet buzz. What's that buzz? Is that speaker blown? No, it's just the rivets in the cabinet go, So I like more mid-rangey, honky stuff off the bass cab, to be honest. I like for rock, I like the SVT, the old Coffin, old time SVT. And that's got some good bottom end, but you don't have to crank it like modern records now, like all that subs, and I don't find it's tight enough on a cabinet, so the DI, I can get that stuff out of there.
So if you're looking more for high end off of your microphones, or the upper frequencies, what mics do you reach for to put on that bass amp?
Well, I like a FET 47 is usually what I usually put on a bass amp. I'll throw a 57 on there as well on one of the cones. And if I want to really carve some mid-range out of that, I'll use that. And then, same as my kick drum, I use an NS10 speaker. Sub kick, yeah. And I find all those aftermarket ones made are horrible. I don't like them at all. It's got to be an NS10 speaker. It's just...
We've heard that from somebody else too, Joe. I can't remember who was saying that.
I as a mix engineer, I would always turn them off. Almost always. But then this company came with a device that was that, but it's called a Low Freak. I forget who makes it. In that one, is not just they've got some rectifying going on in there. It's not just speakers leads off the speakers into like a DI. That one I love. And now I can't go back to the sub kick, but all things created equal, like I find that I use that one actually, which is as just a pure mix engineer. When they come in, I'd almost 10 times out of 10, I'd be turning them off just because it's hard to, it's like you get the fun out of that. And it's like, then you're misleading yourself sometimes. And you go to the NS10s and you're like, oh geez, I built my whole mix around this mic that only half the world's going to hear through the speakers when they get it. So
yeah. Well, I find those aftermarket ones, there's something, even if it's bottom end, there's something plasticky sounding to them. I don't know what but I'll use one of those sub mics on the bass cabinet as well.
That's great. And then you just like, I'm sensing from you, it's like, yeah, this is how I probably start the process, but I kind of just wander around until I find what I want, which is, a sign of a great engineer. It's like, oh, sometimes the D112 is in close, which is like, to me is like, oh, that would be odd, but it's like, I like that you just like, I start off with this and then I kind of craft it into who knows where it ends, but this is where I start from.
Yeah. Do you tend to reamp, Mike? Are you reamping that bass cabinet, or are you tracking it all at the same time?
Track it all at the same time. Yeah. I got to say, this is even my philosophy with mixing is I don't use a lot of outboard gear and stuff, basically because I'm lazy. I just cannot be bothered to take the time and, let's run this through there and then through here. So throw it up there, try and get it with levels, a little bit of EQ, more levels, throw some compression on. Okay, now I need something, and then I'll do something. But I don't automatically try and get it through. And, it'd be cool to run this through the Neve and then the API and do this. So it's worked for me.
Who was it? It was dude who did Killing in the Name of. Who's the the great mix engineer? Stays completely.
Brendan O'Brien.
No, he stays all in the SSL.
Andy Wallace.
Andy Wallace. He's like, I got everything here. Why would I? What do we?
Yeah.
Part of it, I love when people talk like that. I love it because it shows focus. It shows focus on the right thing. You might get a better outcome, and if you do go out and something is better, great. But I just love it when people are so focused, laser focused on one thing, which is like, let me make this record, get everything out of my way. I'm chasing after this record.
Yeah.
Okay. So, guitars. Is it? I'm sure it's like a combo of some microphones. Talk to me.
And it's 57-421. That's
57-421.
All I ever use. Sometimes, and again, up here in Vancouver, we didn't have all the cool mic like the Royers and all that stuff. So, I hear some guitar. I'm like, wow, that's all. How did you guys do that? Oh, that's those ribbon mics. I've never used them. So when I'm working at a studio that have them, sometimes I go, oh, I'll check this out, but it's not quite working for me. So I like to be ready and have the band in. Let's play. I'll just throw 57-421 because it always sounds great.
In what you're looking for that from that 421, I guess it's giving you a little sizzle, but probably a nicer little bit of lower beef too. That's not in the 57, right?
It's funny, like when you put them up there, and I always have the assistant run out with headphones, and then we get the right phase. As he's playing, I'll have him move the mic. Okay, hold it there, and then same with the next one. Make sure the phase is good. And then I'm fine when I'm blending them in the control room as he's playing. You just kind of play with the faders like that, a little more 57, a little more 420, and then there's the sound. Now, if you solo each mic, you go, they sound like crap individually, but together it's like there's the sound. And once you have the placement on the speakers, I rarely even move the mics. Like sometimes if you're looking for a certain scoopy kind of guitar sound, sometimes you want to move them so they're a little out of phase with each other. But once you find the sweet spot on that cabinet, put an X on the on the cabinet, say those mics stay there. That's that sound.
And are you moving? Let's say you got your 57 and 421. I'm holding my fingers here, putting them just so my fingertips are in line, my fingernails, the ends of the speaker, the ends of the mics. We've got a audio and video podcast, so it's like I'm describing it to Helen Keller. But do you keep those capsules? You keep those mics together when you're moving them, or are you just sort of wig-wagging them wherever?
And on separate speakers, and for whatever.
Are you trying to keep them the same distance from the cloth? in
Yes.
general?
Yeah, I like it. I like it as close to the cloth as you can. But then again, sometimes I can't find a spot that's working. So I'll tell the assistant, okay, now pull it back 6 inches.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try that again. So we'll find that 3D sweet spot.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because Phil Brown was talking about, he did all the guitar overdubs for Stairway to Heaven, and he was talking about how he really likes his mics back a bit.
Yeah.
Which totally makes...
At an angle too. Remember Phil
Yeah.
was talking about everything was done at a little bit of an angle. Nothing straight on for him, which is cool.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But I just I thought it's made so much sense to me. I've been engineering for 30 years. It didn't make so much sense that I did it, other than putting room mics up. But like for me to put a guitar mic back 2 or 3 feet, it's like, oh, I don't want to do that. Right. My DNA is like telling me I don't want to do that. But the reality is like, that's kind of where the guitar player stands. Probably is going to sound the most like he expects it to sound.
That's right. Where your ears are. Like nobody's got their ear right up.
Exactly.
Right. Or on drums like that. That's why when we do these interviews, I'm like, oh man, I need to start thinking a little more like that. That's on the table for me now, because all these guys that I really respect, I'll be like, oh, they do it and it makes sense. And maybe I should put more things onto my table that I maybe don't, that I discount, or that I would say, oh, let's not even think of that, or I wouldn't think of it, But I like that. I get what you're saying. It's like, if you measure the distance you are away from let's say the fabric on the front of the amp, those mics, maybe there's like an inch in front of, or it's right on it, or just a millimeter off. You at least know they'll be in phase with one another if they're on different speakers. Yeah. And when you bring them up on the console, these mics tell us, my assumption is they're on top of one another. They're not spread and panned. You have 2 mics and you're bringing them up and they're gnawing out and becoming a unified guitar sound. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So when you're doing that, it's like sometimes you bring up that 57, sometimes you bring up the 421, and you're sort of saying, oh, this one sounds better, and I'm going to add a little of this. But sometimes it's just a matter of bringing those faders, messing with them until you don't know what's happening, until you find something that sounds good. So you're kind of stumbling across it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And then you lock it in and say, that's what we're going to do. Yeah. But keep in mind, listeners, it's like, these mics, phase is not an issue. Your guitars can be 50 degrees out of phase. As long as they're in mono on top of one another, they're perfectly in phase. You're going to hear an EQ that is the net result of that out of phase. So it might shape or honeycomb your sound at that position, but you're 100% in phase, because all the phase reaction has been sort of commemorated, locked into that mono sound. So your EQ will be a little bit different, but you will not have any left or right phase issues. It will be a perfectly phased instrument. So what he's talking about is finding that blend. Both mics are panned. If it's 30 degrees off to the right or 30 off on your fader, they're both at 30. He's bringing them up and finding whatever attributes, finding the sound and locking it in. Once that's locked in, it's perfectly in phase.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. I came up under this engineer that had a really cool philosophy. He would use a D12. His name's Greg Vizzi. He's been on the show as an acoustician. He'd use a D12E. He'd use an Sennheiser 409, MD409, the gold front flat one that Michael McDonald would sing into on some of those videos. He'd use an SM57, put them perfectly in phase, all 3 of them, all the capsules lined up. And then he was like, this is my low end, this is my mid-range, this is my high end. And it got me thinking like that. Oh, well, different characters. Isn't that interesting? You pull up a ribbon mic, it's a totally different, you'd swear it was a different amplifier, a different guitar even, so give yourself the opportunity. I love what you're doing, which is like kind of, you're an engineer at heart, but then you realize there's fairy dust too, where it's like, just find the blend, move the mics until you say, that's it. I like that color. I like what's happening there. And that's on most of your stuff. It's like 421 and 57 is kind of what gets it done for you. I've never used a 421. And when these bands, like band like AC/DC, they're all tracking at the same time, yes?
Oh yeah, all live. Yeah.
What's the pressure of that like?
Most of the records are live. They're so good they could just do it live. And sometimes we'll edit on, hey, that from the second chorus out sounded better on this take, and we'll put it together. But if it doesn't sounds seamless, and you can feel the bump because they don't play to a click, right? So if you feel the bump, it's like, nah, let's use the other take, or let's go and do it again. And there's, in terms of that, they're super quick in the studio. Like they'll maybe do 6 takes of a song, and each take gets a little better. Then there's the wow take, and then it's like, oh no,
we went too far, right? Let's go back to the wow take.
Yeah.
So tell me this. I mean, the pressure's got to be. I mean, it's got to be intense. It's like what you're doing at that point. You're like, I got to not mess this up, right? But there's got to be, and I got to believe, even with a band that's that seasoned and that used to being in the studio, and that, like, it's a job for those guys. I know they love it, but has there ever been a moment where they came in and they're like, holy shit, this sounds great? And it's like, what's that feel like? I mean, to have those guys, the most epic rock band in history, behind you saying, holy crap, that sounds good. And you're the only guy they can point to for that.
I don't know if they've ever done or said that. They're pretty chill guys. They come in and they say, hey, take as much time. When you're ready, let us know and we'll come in and we'll play. And that's it. So if I want to spend 3 days with the techs, their drum tech and their guitar tech, and the drum tech, banging drums and going through all that process till the drums are close. Obviously, you got to get a final tweak in with Phil hitting it because he just hits it different. But basically, it's till I'm ready, and when I'm ready, I say, okay, guys, come on in. So when they don't say anything, that's like them saying, "Fuck, this sounds great." Yeah. They may plug in and say, is that snare a little bit thing, or can we get some more thing off the kick? Then they'll say, well, we'll go get a coffee or a cup of tea and have a couple more packs of cigarettes, and let us know when you're ready. Yeah, kind of thing. And that's what it's about.
How long does it take you to get to the point where they're listening to songs? Let's say you're getting ready to start a new tracking whole date for an album. Like, is it a 2-day process, 1-day process? What's it take?
It depends. You got load in and set up, and sometimes that'll take a week or something because they got a lot of gear and stuff. But
it's insane.
Once we get the drums all set up and they're tuned, and I throw some mics on it, I can usually have a drum sound in a couple hours, unless you run into a problem. So it's not long at all. And I'm ready for them. And then they like taking their time. They come in and drink copious amounts of tea and have their smokes and get yakking away. And, finally somebody's got to go, okay, come on, let's do something today. Okay, let's play. Okay. And then they fire up and maybe play for an hour or so, and have a nice little break again. Maybe you have a break for 2 hours, and, it's pretty chill and relaxed. But, the pressure is on that, you've got to be ready in the studio. When they're ready to go and they want to go, you got to be able to just hit record. There's no, can we try that again? Hey, can you just play a bit of that chorus and tweak? No. When they're playing, you're recording.
That's another one that's hard to learn coming up. It's like you feel compelled to reach over and adjust something, but it's like, am I going to remember what I'm mixing that I reached over and turned down that because it flashed red just for an instant? Yeah. Like, how much headroom is in that pre? Is red mean red, or does red mean,
Yeah. Well, when I first started, the Little Mountain was primarily a jingle studio. So we all got trained by the jingle engineers, and a lot of my first gigs and projects were doing jingles. And funny enough, it's the same with Bob Clearmountain too. He was brought up in the jingle world. Well, the thing is you've got to track and mix, a 60-second spot or whatever in a 5 or 6 hour day. So you've got to have your stuff, and you walk in, you don't know what you're walking into. Oh, today's we've got horns. Oh, we've got strings. And you got to be ready when the musicians come in, bang, hit record. It's not, let's run that over again. Oh, I'm going to change that. No, you got to be ready. So maybe that's early on, that started the mindset where you just kind of got to go. You already kind of know what's going to work. Well, let's try that. Oh, that didn't quite work. Okay, let's do it. And then, and then becoming a mix engineer, you find out where you screwed up. So next time, say, okay, I'm not going to do that again.
I got to leave plenty of headroom on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here's the real, as you're saying that, I'm realizing, like, to be a great engineer, tracking engineer, because a mix engineer is totally different, can be totally different. To be a great tracking engineer, you have to be a true servant but you also have to be a complete leader when you're called upon, which is a really unique kind of person to be able to like not be an alpha, right? To just serve and just be great in capturing. But then there's that moment where the ship's going down and they're looking to the captain, and inevitably you are the guy doing all the work in the room. You're the hardest working person on any record. So sometimes you need to step up. I've never really thought of it that way, but hearing you talk like that, I'm like, man, that's a really unique personality trait when we're talking about the psychology of being successful as an engineer. Sure, you got to be able to do all the tech stuff. You got to be able to be great. But that is probably the trickiest one, because those people who are true servants sometimes have a real issue with stepping up and being the leader. But it's that's what I think separates the men from the boys.
Yeah, it's a tough thing sometimes, like, with the AC/DC stuff too, that like they could be in the middle of the take, and a lot of their takes are great, if not awesome. And I'll stop them and say, sorry guys, the snare head just went dead. And rather than get this awesome take on tape and they go, oh, what happened to the snare drum? I'll stop them. Like, I'm very careful, you got to kind of weigh and
they know that you wouldn't abuse that.
Like, okay, am I stopping this, or this is really good though? And, so, and, they don't get upset. Sometimes they think, shoot, that was going to be a great take, or I was feeling that one. It's like, yeah, sorry. And they oh, no problem. Yeah. Do what you got to do to fix it. And
they're grateful at the end of it. They trust you. Before we talk a little about the vocal stuff, I wanted to ask you, like, to be on 7 records with them and to work with them, what you said, 4 producers.
Mm-hmm.
So did the band say we want Mike to do the record, or how did you carry on? It was the band?
Yeah, it was the band. Yeah.
Wow, dude. That's like being a member of the band.
Yeah. Well, and then the first one we did with Brendan O'Brien, because, Brendan's a pretty awesome engineer as well, and great mixer and stuff. I don't know what their conversation was with him. I wasn't there, but when we all got together at the studio, Brendan says, hey, look, as you know, I'm an engineer too, and this and that. And he says, I'm going to want to jump on the board and do things. He says, are you going to have a problem with that? I'm like, no, man, we're here to make a record. So occasionally he'd jump, we'd listening to playback, and he'd jump in and do his thing. And, can you, put the mix over here, because I want to try doing something like that and add that into the live stuff, whatever his little tricks were. And I'm there to please you too, man. Like, you're the producer. So we got along great. So then the next, did I do 3 with Brendan now? I think so. Yeah. So then the next records almost became more comfortable because we knew each other, and he touched the board less. But he knew anytime he wanted to jump in and change stuff, like, I'm not, it's not my baby, I'm not proud, if you want to change the snare, man. Like, we're there to make a great record. We're not there to have Mike Fraser on it, or whatever. It's like, we're just there as a team. So, that was
what a great attitude,
because Brendan, such a great engineer. Bruce Fairburn wasn't an engineer. George Young was an engineer. Rick Rubin wasn't an engineer. So, that was easy to separate our jobs. But, when you got 2 engineers that do the similar things working together, it's a bit of a psychology thing you got to get through. But, Brendan and I are really good friends and get each other. So
I find that when you accept that kind of stuff, and you just like, you may not like it or want it, you accept it, you learn to love it. Like, it becomes like, oh, we're doing something even better now. Right. Yeah. Rather than like trying to stop, the inevitable, and then having an issue where you're not on the next 6 records, right. You find it actually like, oh, I'm so glad that I was kind of forced into that, because the record's better because of it. And now I've got another faculty to be able to make a record better.
And you get another chance to learn something. Like, I've always liked it. Like, I think as an engineer, once you stop learning, you've reached your peak. So I always like to learn stuff, and you get a new guy in there. He's got a different approach. You may not like it or agree, but say, oh, but that one's kind of, I like how he does that. And then you try and incorporate that into your repertoire,
Awesome. Great. There's so much to learn outside of the skill of engineering that make you successful. So for the vocals, what vocal mic sounds best on him?
Well, I find with screamers like him and and Steven Tyler and stuff. You know, so many years they've developed their craft live, and it was always 57 or 58s, which is basically a 57 with a pop screen on it. That's what we always used. Now we use the SM4? What's the big one?
SM7B or 7?
Yeah, I think that's what Brendan used in the last 3 we've done, which is similar, but it's just got a different top end. But I always use the 58 on Bryan because he likes to hold it. You know, you can stick a mic up there and he's just always moving around. And it's really hard to, and then he finds he's concentrating more and trying to keep his head there and not singing. He likes singing like this. So here, you hold it and I'll deal with the rattle and the pops and, you know, clicks and stuff you get from the handheld, but whatever, we'll deal with that later or it won't be a problem, you know? So again, you make the singer comfortable with his sound. And those are great mics. Like, you know, okay, you got to add a bit of top end, but I find with the 57s, you don't really get a lot of that sibilance problems you do with a lot of other mics, where you've got to really kind of watch that 3 to 4 2K area where those amps just plow through. 57's never really a problem.
Yeah, you know, I think the SM7B is actually, if not the same element, very similar. It's just the distance. There's a giant distance, and 58 gives you that ball, which is maybe an inch. In the SM7B, if you take off that top, I think it's more like a 3 or 4 inch, so the proximity fix even goes further. But I'm pretty sure that those elements are very, if not the same. I've read different accounts of it, but that SM7B just gets you a little bit further away, which the only problem I've ever had with live vocals is that like barkiness or there's some weird handling noise that you get with those 57s and 58s sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think it's a baller move to be like, yeah, we're going to use 58 on the vocal. Like that kind of impresses me, you know. It's like because we know it sounds great. It's like you're going to use an $85 handheld mic on maybe one of the most important rock records of the year. Yeah, we think it sounds good.
But it's also what makes them comfortable.
Yeah, we've got these $20,000 tube mics over here, and we're going to leave them in the mic closet. Yeah.
Yeah, good on you, man. I love that because that shows vision.
With Steven Tyler, I guess we sort of stumbled onto that one because, you know, we'd have him in a little vocal booth because we're tracking it all live. He's singing along or scatting along or whatever. And on some of the songs, we went to sing it or whatever. So, you know, I really like that. You know, what I did live there, you know, we change the lyrics of the chorus. Can I just sing the chorus again? So, okay, so back into the booth so we could match it all, right? And that sort of became his sound. We're like, well,
yeah,
why do it separate? He was comfortable in his booth. He had his little posters, all his things, his little stuff around him, his lights, and then he just loved being in his little booth. So, and he was such a great singer that, you know, again, a lot of the live stuff, we grab bits and then, oh, that was great. Just that moment there was great. And so we sort of stumbled on using that mic on Steven. You know, if we would have done it traditionally and sung all the vocals at the end, we might have put up some of those tube mics and stuff.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, and you know, you could probably find something that's great with those too, but there's something really special, like Brendan O'Brien when he did Evil Empire.
Yeah.
And I loved Killing in the Name of, but it sounded like a studio record. You know, it sounded pro.
Yeah.
But that Killing in the Name of, not Killing in the Name of, but Evil Empire that Brendan did on Rage, that had such a raw thing that for me, like creatively, it was like that was the record that band was supposed to make their whole life. You know, it just fit perfectly. And in the imperfections were like, they're even better because they were what that band was all about. Who wants a clean version, you know, clean sonically, you know, perfect version, pristine version of Rage Against the Machine, you know? So it's interesting to make those decisions based off of the creative aspect rather than thinking about what's the best spec'd out mic you can put in front of someone.
Yeah, exactly.